Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today, we've got excerpts from a documentary script
Okay.
called Blades of Change, with the subtitle, The Dawn of Modern Japan.
Wow.
And, well, it looks like we're going to be talking about, well, one of those moments in history where everything changes in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
We're talking about Japan and going from being isolated for centuries
Right.
to becoming a global power.
Yeah. And all the craziness and upheaval that comes with that.
Exactly.
What I think is so incredible is just how fast it all happened.
Right.
I mean, you think about Japan in the early 1800s.
Yeah.
It was like this perfectly preserved time capsule.
Okay.
You've got feudal society, right, ruled by the Tokugawa Shogunate. They'd purposely cut themselves off from the rest of the world for over 200 years.
Wow.
Under this, what they call the Sakoku policy.
So they basically just hit pause on interacting with everyone else.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So I'm curious then, what was daily life actually like during all this isolation? I mean, was it all like samurai and tea ceremonies?
Well, the the documentary script paints this picture of a society that's super traditional.
Okay.
You know, everyone's got their place, the farmers, the merchants,
Okay.
the samurai, all playing their roles.
Yeah.
And yeah, you do have the tea ceremonies, and you've got these blacksmiths crafting these incredible swords.
Wow.
But at the same time, you get these little hints of change kind of bubbling beneath the surface.
Oh, really?
Like, did you know that some schools were actually starting to use Western textbooks?
No.
Yeah, even back then.
It's like they knew change was coming, even if they weren't quite ready for it.
Yeah.
Speaking of change, I guess that's where Commodore Perry and his infamous black ships come in.
Exactly.
Right.
In 1853, Perry's fleet of American warships just steams right into Edo Bay.
Wow.
And you've got to imagine what a shock that must have been to the Japanese people.
Right.
I mean, these massive coal-powered ships, it's just,
Yeah.
you know, they were a symbol of Western industrial might, you know, military might.
Right.
And let's be honest, they weren't exactly there for a friendly visit.
Okay, so Perry basically rocks up and says, open up to trade and diplomacy. Or else,
Sit time much. Yeah,
not very subtle.
not at all. And the documentary really emphasizes that
Okay, yeah.
Perry's arrival, it wasn't about cultural exchange or anything.
Right.
It was about forcing Japan out of isolation.
Wow.
The script even has these really vivid descriptions of the voyage itself. You can almost like feel the spray of the ocean
Wow.
and sense the tension on board.
So I imagine that this kind of intrusion would throw the ruling class into chaos.
Oh, absolutely.
What was their reaction? I mean, were they all on the same page about how to handle this sudden challenge from the West?
Oh, not at all. No, the country was completely divided on how to respond.
Okay.
And I mean, you can understand why, right?
Yeah.
You've got these two main factions that emerge. The Joy,
Okay.
which means expel the barbarians.
Right.
And then you have the Kaikoku, which basically means open the country.
So two very different approaches.
Oh, yeah. And these weren't just like political stances.
Right.
It was like two completely different visions for Japan's future.
So you have one side clinging to tradition and the other embracing modernization as the only way forward.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like the country was on the verge of tearing itself apart.
Yeah, basically.
So the Joy faction then,
Yeah.
they were mostly the traditionalists.
Right. A lot of samurai
Okay.
who saw these foreigners as a threat to their entire way of life.
Right.
They wanted to protect Japan's culture, you know, at all costs.
Okay. And the Kaikoku, they saw things differently.
Well, they believed that Japan actually needed to embrace Western technology and ideas
Okay.
if they wanted to survive in this new world order.
Interesting. So caught in the middle of all this is the shogunate, the ruling government.
Right.
I bet they were feeling the pressure from both sides.
Oh, yeah. They were in a really tough spot. The
Yeah.
shogunate was already kind of weakened, struggling to maintain control, and Perry's arrival just made everything worse.
So what did they do?
Well, they ended up choosing what they thought was the path of least resistance,
Which was?
giving in to Perry's demands.
Okay.
In 1854, they signed the Treaty of Kanagawa,
Mm-hmm.
which opened up certain Japanese ports to American ships.
So they tried to appease the West and prevent conflict,
Right.
but it backfired?
Oh, it backfired spectacularly.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people, especially the Joy faction, they saw it as a sign of weakness.
Wow.
It just fueled even more unrest.
So instead of bringing stability, this actually pushed Japan closer to revolution.
Exactly.
It set the stage for the Meiji Restoration.
Yeah,
This is where things really start to get interesting.
absolutely.
But before we jump into all that,
Sure.
let's just take a step back for a second
Mm-hmm.
and think about the significance of these black ships.
Right.
I mean, they're more than just warships,
Yeah.
right? They're almost like a symbol of everything that Japan both feared and was drawn to about the West.
Oh, yeah. They represented the Industrial Revolution, technology,
Yeah.
the sheer military power of the West.
Right.
And for the Japanese people, I mean, it must have been both terrifying and awe-inspiring at the same time.
Yeah.
And of course, it just showed how vulnerable Japan was after all those years of isolation.
Yeah, it's like this wake-up call, forcing them to confront a reality they'd been able to ignore for so long.
Exactly.
And that wake-up call, it triggered this chain of events that would transform Japan in ways no one could have imagined.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think we're ready to explore those transformations.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Meiji Restoration
Right.
and how it completely reshaped Japan from top to bottom.
Let's do it.
All right,
Yeah.
okay, so the stage is set, Japan is completely divided,
Yeah.
there's all this simmering resentment, and the future is, well, it's suddenly very uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the Meiji Restoration comes in.
Exactly. Fast forward to 1868.
Okay.
That fragile stability, created by the shogunate, it just crumbles.
Wow.
The Tokugawa shogunate is overthrown,
Mm-hmm.
and Emperor Meiji is restored to power.
Okay, so it's more than just a new emperor on the throne.
Oh, yeah.
It's a whole new Japan.
Exactly. The Meiji Restoration, it was a radical departure from the past.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, they abolished feudalism.
Wow.
The samurai class, they lost their special privileges, their power,
Yeah.
and the country embarked on this rapid and often ruthless modernization program.
The script uses the term breakneck to describe the pace of change.
Yeah.
So what did this modernization look like? I mean,
Right.
was it just about catching up to the West technologically?
Well, it was about that, but it went much deeper.
Okay.
Think railroads, like crisscrossing the entire nation,
Wow.
connecting cities, facilitating trade,
Yeah.
telegraph lines humming with messages, shrinking distances,
Right.
speeding up communication.
It's not just technology then.
No, they overhauled the whole government too.
Oh, wow.
Modeled it after Western powers,
Okay.
and implemented universal education based on Western principles.
Okay.
And they even revamped their entire military,
Wow.
adopting Western tactics, weaponry, the whole thing.
It's mind-boggling that they managed to do all of this so quickly.
I know, right?
So was there some kind of master plan?
Mm.
Or were they just making it up as they went along?
It's kind of a combination,
Okay.
Strategic planning, but also like desperate improvisation.
Okay.
They were very aware of what had happened to China
Right.
just a few years earlier.
Hmm.
China had been carved up by Western powers.
So they looked at China and thought, we can't let that happen to us.
Exactly. They saw modernization as a matter of national survival.
That makes sense. But even with a clear goal,
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't there have been some resistance to these changes?
Oh, absolutely. Especially from the people who benefited from the old ways.
Right.
This whole period was marked by violence,
Yeah.
upheaval. Thousands died in the wars and uprisings.
Yeah, the documentary doesn't shy away from that human cost.
No, not at all.
And what about the samurai?
Right.
I mean, they weren't just going to accept losing their status and their privileges, right?
Right, you're right. And their decline is actually one of the most poignant points of this whole story.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're a warrior class
Right.
for centuries. You're the elite of Japanese society.
Hmm.
And then suddenly your skills, your way of life, it's just obsolete.
Yeah.
A lot of samurai felt a deep sense of loss,
Right.
betrayal even.
And some of them actually resisted.
Oh yeah, some actively resisted the new order.
It's like a reminder that progress, it often comes at a price
Hmm.
for individuals and for society as a whole.
Yeah, that's a theme that runs throughout this entire period.
Yeah.
The Meiji Restoration, it was about building a new Japan,
Hmm.
but it also meant dismantling a lot of the old Japan.
So they successfully modernized then,
Yeah.
at least from a technological and structural point of view.
Yeah.
But did this rapid transformation actually achieve its goal? Did it make Japan strong enough to stand up to the West?
Well, within a generation, Japan went from being this isolated, almost feudal society
Right.
to a major player on the world stage.
Wow.
And they proved their new strength
Okay.
by defeating Russia.
No way.
Yeah, in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905.
Wow. A victory against Russia, that's a pretty clear sign that they weren't going to be pushed around anymore.
Yeah, it sent shockwaves through the global power structure.
But did they really manage to, take what they needed from the West and adapt it to their own culture?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And it's one that historians are still debating today.
Okay.
I mean, on one hand, Japan was incredibly successful at selectively adopting Western technologies, institutions.
Right.
They didn't just imitate, they integrated these new elements into their existing cultural framework.
So they weren't just mimicking, they were innovating
Yeah.
and integrating.
Exactly. Like, look at how they modernized their military. They studied Western tactics, technology, sure.
Yeah.
But they also kept and refined their own martial traditions.
Like Bushido.
The Samurai Code of Honor.
Right.
They created this hybrid system,
Right. Yeah.
modern and uniquely Japanese.
So it was a deep integration, not just superficial.
Right.
But what about the cultural side of things?
Mm.
Was there this push to become more Western in terms of values, beliefs?
There definitely was a fascination with Western culture during this period.
Okay.
You know, everything from fashion and music to literature and art.
Right.
But it wasn't a simple case of cultural assimilation.
So did they manage to hold on to their cultural core?
It's complicated, but I think it's fair to say that Japan never fully abandoned its own traditions and values.
Right.
They modernized without losing their sense of identity.
And that's what makes the Meiji Restoration so remarkable.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a story of radical change,
Mm-hmm.
but also resilience, adaptation.
Absolutely. It challenges us to think about progress, tradition, modernity, and a nation's ability to reinvent itself without losing its soul.
Wow. It's amazing to think that in just a few decades, Japan went from like a nation on the brink
Right.
to a force to be reckoned with, on the world stage.
Yeah.
This whole Blades of Change documentary,
Mm-hmm.
it really it captures that sense of transformation.
It does. It's a testament to their resilience, their adaptability.
Yeah, for sure. But this rapid modernization,
Right.
like we were talking about before,
Yeah.
it wasn't without its costs. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about the upheaval, the loss of life,
Mm-hmm.
the decline of the samurai.
Right.
But I'm curious about the ripple effects. Beyond Japan's borders, how did the rest of the world react
Yeah.
to this sudden emergence of a new power in Asia?
Well, for one thing, it really challenged the existing global order.
Oh.
Remember, this was a time when European powers, they dominated most of the world.
Right.
Japan's success at modernizing,
Yeah.
asserting its own interests, it sent a powerful message.
Like, hey, the old rules don't apply anymore.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it actually inspired other nations,
Really?
especially in Asia,
Yeah.
to look at Japan as like a potential model for their own development.
Oh, wow.
If Japan could break free from Western dominance,
Right.
maybe they could too.
So Japan's transformation, it wasn't just about Japan then.
No.
It was a catalyst for change
Yeah.
on a much larger scale.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder how things might have turned out
Right.
if Japan had stayed isolated.
Yeah, that's one of those big what ifs of history.
Right.
It's impossible to know for sure.
Yeah.
But it's safe to say that Japan's emergence as a modern power,
Mm-hmm.
it had a huge impact on the course of 20th century history.
But I guess not all of those impacts were positive.
Right.
We can't ignore the fact that Japan's growing military strength
Mm-hmm.
eventually led to their involvement in World War II.
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
You see, the Meiji Restoration, initially it was about self-preservation,
Right.
resisting Western imperialism.
Yeah.
But it did eventually turn into something quite different.
Right.
Japan's rapid industrialization, military buildup,
Yeah.
it fueled their ambitions for regional dominance,
Okay.
which ultimately led to conflict.
So it's almost like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Modernization.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a powerful tool for good,
Right.
but it can also be used for destructive purposes.
And that's why it's so important to study history,
Yeah.
not just to learn about the past,
Right.
but to understand the present,
Mm-hmm.
to grapple with the choices we face today.
Right. As a global society.
Exactly.
Well, this whole deep dive has been a whirlwind.
Yeah.
We've covered centuries of Japanese history in such a short amount of time.
It's a lot to take in.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, there's always more to learn,
Right.
more to explore, to question. I think that's the real takeaway here.
Like-
It's not about having all the answers. It's about being curious,
Right.
asking the right questions,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that history is never a simple story.
So for everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has
Yeah.
sparked your curiosity,
Absolutely.
maybe even inspired you to keep digging.
Yeah.
Maybe check out the full Blades of Change documentary. Remember, history is more than just dates and facts, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's about people, choices, consequences, these enduring questions that connect us all.
I completely agree.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains buzzing.
Take care, everyone.